I believe one of the biggest downfalls of open world design was the creation of the horse. And I know that's going to sound like a really random point to start with, but when it comes to world design, I feel like the games where you don't have a horse, in Fallout, for example, the Fallout franchise, is designed for you to walk very slowly around its world, and as you do, the world is designed for points of interest to catch your attention. That could be any kind of landmark, from a world event to a location, a dungeon, a vault, anything to catch your attention. The difference is, like in a game like Skyrim, where you're on a horse and you travel a lot faster, which means you might miss a good majority of locations that fly past. So the game has to be designed with these massive stretches in between the key locations to serve the purpose of having a horse. And there are some games where this is not as noticeable because the horse speed is carefully balanced with like how much the player can see as they're travelling. They can see major locations, but I think one of the issues is that you have to have a lot of dead space when you can travel that quickly. And I think this is a problem. And we saw this especially in a recent release with Starfield. Starfield has an open world that is designed for you to travel very quickly because it only has a couple of points on each map, but they are incredibly far apart. It's almost designed for you to travel in some sort of vehicle. However, Bethesda's engine is too slow to render the planets out properly, so you have to walk no matter what. And yes, since the game has came out, they have included a buggy, but that buggy is a bit buggy. And that's where the subject of today's video comes in, because of course, we have to relate this all to Assassin's Creed. There's a reason that I made a video purely dedicated to the world design of Assassin's Creed Rogue, and that's because Assassin's Creed Rogue and Black Flag, in my opinion, have the best world design in the series. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. When it comes to Assassin's Creed, I believe there are two major distinctions in the world design. There are the cities, and there is the countryside. There is the open spaces to get to those cities. Now, in the earlier games, you could not just fast travel straight from Masyaf to Acre or Damascus. You had to take a long, winding path through the mountains to get to it. And I believe the intention of this was purely artistic, because they wanted to emphasise the distance that Altair has to travel to get to his locations. However, if I asked you the question, how much have you explored those areas in between Damascus and Masyaf? The mountain area specifically. How much of that have you actually explored in Assassin's Creed 1? Because, personally, it's not very much. And that's because the open world has very little there. In fact, it's pretty much all just generic filler sort of villages and pathways and little mountain peaks. The only things to uncover are a few flags and a few of the Templars that you need to kill. But aside from that, there's no locations, there's no reason why you would ever stay and explore these locations. And I think that is a fundamental problem that strangely has carried forward into the franchise in a larger way than I would have expected. Because when I first thought of this concept for a video, I was thinking more about, Assassin's Creed Valhalla takes you like 30 hours to get from one location to another. But then I was like, well, this has been in the franchise forever. Assassin's Creed, for the most part, has always had areas of completely dead space with no reason for you to explore them. Assassin's Creed 2 had the mountains area, which was used for one really cool chase scene in the story, and then there's no reason for it to exist again. Assassin's Creed 3 had the frontier, which, yes, has some hunting side quests and the frontiersman missions, but aside from that, it was a very big, empty open world that was used for hunting and such, but it didn't need to be as big as it was because there wasn't enough actual locations to justify the size. Now, I did make a whole other video talking about Assassin's Creed Rogue's world design in particular, but the one thing that I didn't do was compare it to the other games, and that's what I want to do here, because Assassin's Creed 4 and Assassin's Creed Rogue fixed, fundamentally, what was going wrong here. The cities in Assassin's Creed, in my opinion, have always been not perfect, but very well designed, because they are designed with traversal in mind. An objective could be 400 or 500 metres away, but you know that it's going to be a very entertaining time to get to that objective, because you've got all these ropes and beams and everything sticking out of the buildings where you're like, oh, this could be fun, I'm going to have a fun little traverse, up and down the buildings. And even if you just run along the ground, you're probably going to run into some guards and engage in combat. There's going to be something to keep you engaged on the way there, and maybe there'll be a few collectibles on the way. Assassin's Creed doesn't really tend to do like the open world style of locations to discover, at least not in its early games. It had collectibles to entice you to move this way or that way, or chests to upgrade your ships and stuff like that. And that's how we were able to get games like Assassin's Creed Unity and Assassin's Creed Syndicate that are entirely just a city. But I think Ubisoft always wanted to incorporate a bit of RPG mechanics into their games, and some of that does involve the lengthy journeys between locations to really emphasize the scale of the story and the fact that you are playing in an entire country, you're not just in one city. Now, what Assassin's Creed 4 and Rogue perfected, every single city was its own condensed location. You had to load into that city by travelling on your ship. When you look at the layout of Assassin's Creed 4, it is really just a load of little islands and then a couple of major cities in between. The game has the 3 major cities with Nassau, Havana and Kingston, which are densely packed cities and in a very traditional Assassin's Creed city sort of design. You know what to expect when you go to Havana. You're going to have all the beams and the poles sticking out, and there's no horses in that game either because they didn't need the horses. Now, Assassin's Creed 4 also has an incredible amount of islands in the game. I mean, it's pretty much 80% of the game is going to be these random little islands. And here's how they perfected how those islands were designed. Now, if we go back to Assassin's Creed 2, we had tombs. Assassin tombs were heavily scripted locations that were on their own, but because they were heavily scripted, they kept you engaged, entertained, and allowed for more cinematic set pieces throughout their longevity. And they were only about 10-15 minutes long, so they really gave you that like dopamine hit of like, wow, I want to do another one of these. And thankfully, the game had 6, including more that were added with DLC and then further in Brotherhood and Revelations. They found a formula that really worked when it came to the tombs, because they were just short enough to keep you wanting more. So what did Black Flag do? It gave you like 30 of them, and they're all different. Every single island is not heavily scripted, but they are laid out in a way where you're going to be using parkour, navigation, and your own problem solving to complete the navigational part of the map, because you want to discover all the collectibles. The difference between the collectibles in Black Flag and, let's say, Odyssey is that the collectibles in Black Flag are a way of getting you to traverse the world. You wouldn't just go to one of Black Flag's islands and naturally explore the whole thing. You see that, oh, there's an animus shard over there, but that doesn't make sense because there's no clear route to it. And that gets your brain thinking, how do I find the route to this? It's probably going to involve some parkour, maybe even some mechanics. Assassin's Creed Rogue had those sheets of ice that you had to shoot with your gun in order to discover hidden areas. So Assassin's Creed Rogue really evolved on what Black Flag was doing. So that made each area in this game engaging. Now you may say, okay, that's fair enough. Assassin's Creed 4 also had massive stretches of water with nothing on them, and that is a fair criticism. However, I would argue that you can do a lot more on the ships than you can with a horse. And that's why the open seas were littered with cargo ships and boats to be sunk and engaged with and fought. You would have bounty hunters chasing you down sometimes. Compared to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where again we have some islands that are isolated, but they're sort of massive, so they can't be properly scripted, and they seem almost procedurally generated. In fact, this is a problem with Assassin's Creed Odyssey's world design in general, is that when you approach a new location, there's not going to be any kind of engaging way to approach the area. If you come up to a guard's camp, you're pretty much just going to be doing the same thing every time. You'll look at the checklist on the side and see, okay, there's 2 chests, 3 whatever guards I need to kill, but they're not in interesting locations. You can pretty much see where they're going to be from the start. And that could be maybe due to the eagle, because since Assassin's Creed Origins, they added the eagle which flies overhead, which gives you a perfect layout of how the open world looks. And in some ways, that spoils the fun. Because can you imagine, in Black Flag, if you could fly an eagle above all of the islands, you would see all the paths you need to take, and it would ruin a lot of that magic. Assassin's Creed has recently leaned very far away from cities and tombs. I think these were the two elements that kept the games interesting to navigate in the open world. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have a horse or that you can't ride across a field. I mean, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, some of its most beautiful moments were when you're travelling across the English countryside. The problem is, it's not very engaging. And I think Ubisoft even knew it wasn't very engaging because they added an option to enable autopilot. If you know that players are going to get bored travelling on horseback, to the point where you need to add an autopilot feature so they can just stop playing, you know you've done something wrong. And an issue that I seem to be seeing in the most recent Assassin's Creed games, and unfortunately appears to have cropped up in Shadows as well, is the commitment to historical accuracy for the world and not fun. The worlds of Florence and Venice in Assassin's Creed 2 would have all these beams and ropes and everything sticking out of it, and it would look a little bit realistic, but you wouldn't have that many upturned carts and boxes and stuff to help you parkour in the real world. And with Assassin's Creed Mirage, we saw a real return to form, where the city did look kind of realistic, but it also looked like, oh, okay, here's a million different options I can now take for parkour. And with Assassin's Creed Shadows, I just see a heavily realistic looking world. All of the buildings don't have like anything sticking out. They don't have any navigational indicators, so it doesn't look to me like I can climb any of this. In fact, the only environmental indication I can see is the trees that stick out, that have that little bit of tape on them, that Naue can use her rope to swing on. That's the only thing I can see that's like an environmental traversal. Now, that's not to say that all of this is doom and gloom, because I do have a positive note to end the video on. In the most recent trailer for Assassin's Creed Shadows, we got their world trailer. Not a trailer that I thought needed mentioning, but it did have one key element. There is a part where you see Naue use her traversal to unlock new parts of the map, and we did also get clarification on this, that Naue will be able to explore little nooks and crannies around the world, and it will have these hidden paths that only she can take. That was my first indication that we should be taking the open world more seriously and not just like a horse riding simulator. It gives me hope that we're going to get a more densely packed open world in Shadows. We've seen that there's going to be these massive open vistas of nothingness. But honestly, if they just incorporated the islands from Black Flag and just made them into locations in Japan, like if you could just discover a hidden pathway and that whole pathway leads to a brand new sort of, I don't know, a hidden cliff, but it's like a full navigational puzzle to get to the top of that cliff to get a chest or something. That's all I'm asking for. Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Valhalla only briefly had things like this. I mean, Valhalla had like keys that you needed to unlock to get into houses. That was like the height of puzzle solving in that game. And half of them were bullshit, by the way. Half of them were stupid. I spent far too long trying to unlock stupid door. Why can't he just hit the door down? Why couldn't Eivor just break the door down? And although we haven't seen it yet, I'm very hopeful that Shadows has a traditional Assassin's Creed city. Even Valhalla had Jorvik, and that was a very... Actually, very is a strong word. It was quite well designed in terms of parkour and navigation. It was the only city in the game that was densely packed enough that you could actually do parkour on it. And I'm hoping that Shadows has something like that. They haven't shown us any of the cities that are going to be in the game yet. All we've seen is like the same guard outpost. It's mental. So what do you think about the open world in Assassin's Creed? I know that this video has been a little bit disjointed, but what do you think the open world's going to be like in Shadows? And also, what would you like to see Assassin's Creed incorporate into its world design in the future? Let me know down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more Assassin's Creed content, and I will see you in the next video.